Good evening. I'm very pleased that so many of you are able to attend me this evening. I am, of course, Victoria, Queen of Great Britain and Empress of India. I am come here tonight to talk to you a little bit about my life, the love of my life, my dearest Albert, and my children. The happiest times in my life were the first year of my marriage, when Albert and I were as yet sans enfant, no children. And then again in 1860, when all of my children had been born, and I was quite sure there were no others on the way. And in that year, I had not yet, as yet, lost dear Mama or my dearest Albert. They were both still alive at that time. And so that is the year in which I choose to return to you. In 1860, I was 41 years of age, not yet Empress of India, but I had been queen for 23 years already. I was mother to 9 children and had recently become Gan to one grandson, the future Kaiser Wilhelm, or Willie, as he was known in the family. So I suppose I should start at the beginning, because it really is a terribly interesting story about how I, the little Princess Alexandrina Victoire of Kent, became the second longest reigning monarch in British history. To begin, you must remember my grandfather, King George III. I think you refer to him as Mad King George III. It is under his reign that you Americans sought your independence from England, although why you would want to do that still escapes me. But in any case, my grandfather had many children, sons and daughters, none of whom managed to produce a living, legitimate heir. The key word here being legitimate. Until my uncle, Prince George, he was also the Prince Regent, had a daughter. But then she grew up and married and then died in childbirth, and her baby with her. So there was again no living, legitimate heir. The race was on, so to speak, to see who could produce the first heir. 3 brothers were successful in this. My father, Edward, the Duke of Kent, married my mother, Victoire, and had me. 2 other, even younger brothers also had children, but because my father was the eldest of those 3 brothers, the crown would eventually fall to me. Now, in 1820, when my grandfather died, the crown passed to his son, the Prince Regent, my Uncle George, and he reigned as King George IV. When he died in 1830, the crown then passed to the next oldest brother in line, because Uncle George hadn't any legitimate issues. And this was my Uncle William, the Duke of Clarence. Now, when he died in 1837, the dear man, the crown then passed to me as the daughter of the next oldest brother in line. So now you understand everything. So I should probably get you a genealogy. I think, do we have those, Lady Cameron? Yes, could you all give Lady Cameron a round of applause, please? She'll pass that out. My given names were Alexandrina for my godfather, Alexander, the Tsar of Russia, and Victoire for my mother. But I was often called Drina as a small child. I don't know. I prefer Victoria. Queen Drina doesn't have quite the same ring, don't you think? I mostly spoke German with my mother. I do speak English, German, and French. And when I was very small, I did tend to speak German with her because her English wasn't what it should be. Now, having grown up with German customs, German governess, and a love of German holidays, that was all fine. But I was born and raised in Kensington Palace. And I lived there with my mother, with my half-sister Theodora from my mother's first marriage, my mother's lady, Baroness Spate, my lady-in-waiting, Baroness Lesen, and my mother's advisor, Sir John Conroy, whom I detested. You see, my father had died when I was but a babe, and Conroy had maneuvered himself into a position of dominance over my mother and subsequently over me. He sought to be the power behind the throne, with my mother as regent, when it became clear to him that I would eventually become the queen. I think I was, I don't know, 11 or so years old when I realized that I was going to be the queen. Now, in order to keep control over me, my mother, at Conroy's insistence, instituted what came to be known as the Kensington system. And this was a series of measures designed to supposedly protect me, but which merely served to smother and isolate me from any person with whom I might have formed an attachment. I was also kept away from the court, as Mamma did not think it fit that I should associate with all of the Fitzclarences, my Uncle William's many illegitimate children. So, now the most bizarre aspects of the Kensington system were that I always had to sleep with Mamma in her room, never being parted from her. I always had to have my hand held, especially whilst going up and down stairs, and this until I was 18 years of age. I had my food tasted before I could eat it. I was not allowed to have books or friends of my own choosing, only those chosen for me by Conroy or my tutor. So I think I'm finished with this. It's getting warm in here. So as you can imagine, I had a rather melancholy childhood, bereft of true friends. My sister, Theodora, left me to be married when I was 9 years old, and so the only support I had was from Baroness Leysen. She adored me, and I adored her, and she really did seem to have no other life but to take care of me. But I was rather in awe of her, too. But I did have some amusements. You're going to be very jealous. I had a pony and a cart. Yes. And I was able to attend the opera and the ballet on occasion. I also had a magnificent collection of dolls, over 130 of them, whom Leysen and I dressed up. We played with them, made clothes for them. It was wonderful. And I also had my darling Dash, my King Charles Spaniel. I have had many, many dogs in my lifetime. And I think we have a portrait. Do we, Lady Cameron, have a portrait of Dash? You're going to see him. Mamma had his portrait painted for me. And in fact, I have to tell you a funny thing. On the day of my coronation, my first concern was to make sure that Dash had his bath, because it was a Thursday, and Thursdays were Dash's bath day. Yes. Now, of all the dogs that I've had over the years, I have to say that they bring such pleasure, loyalty, and friendship. I think if it were not for the honest faces of dogs, we should forget the very existence of sincerity. I think that humans would do well to imitate them. Don't you think? Even though Mamma had forbidden it, I was able to attend the court on a couple of occasions. Once, when I was very small, I even was allowed to ride in the carriage with my Uncle George. I called him Uncle King, and he allowed me to peck him on the cheek. He liked me very well, I think. And then later, when Uncle William was king, it was August of 1836, and Mamma and I were invited to what turned out to be his final birthday celebration. Unfortunately, my Uncle William had chosen that day to seek revenge upon Mamma, who had kept me away from the court, away from him, away from the Queen, my Aunt Adelaide. He wanted to make sure that everyone at that banquet knew that he hoped to live until I was 18 years old, so that my mother could never be regent. Now, I would like you to imagine that there is a long banquet table. My Uncle William, the king, was at the center of the table. Mamma and I were seated off to his left. He rose from the table to propose a toast, and I shall try to remember exactly what he said. He said, "I trust to God that my life will be spared for 9 months longer. I shall then have the satisfaction of leaving the exercise of the royal authority to the personal authority of that young lady, heiress presumptive to the crown, and not in the hands of a person now near me, who is surrounded by evil advisers," he meant Conroy, of course, "and is herself incompetent to act with propriety in the situation in which she would be placed." Oh dear. The speech was so shocking, the situation so dreadful, that I burst into tears, and it was only with great difficulty that we prevented Mamma from leaving immediately. You will be surprised to learn that my Uncle William did live just long enough to see me to my 18th birthday. And then he died. Yes. They came to me early in the morning to tell me that I was queen. I said, "I will be good." I was ready to be the queen. And I was certainly ready to free myself from the domination that I had experienced at the hands of Conroy and my mother. Do you know, when I was 16 years of age, I fell quite ill. Conroy and my mother tried to take advantage of my weakened state in order to force me to sign a document making Conroy my private secretary, a very important position in the household. I managed to fend off their attacks, but I never forgave Mamma for what I considered a breach of confidence. Eventually, when I became queen, very first thing, I had my bed removed from my mother's room, and I slept on my own for the first time. And I never allowed my mother to read my journal ever again, which she was wont to do. And I eventually banished Conroy from court. When we moved into Buckingham Palace, and I was the first monarch to live there, I assigned Mamma rooms far from my own and allowed her to have no say or to give me any advice. I relied completely on my uncle, King Leopold, and his advisor, Baron Stockmar, and of course, my dear Lord M., Lord Melbourne. He was my first Prime Minister, and he was so wonderful. He was like a father figure and puppy love, all rolled into one. The day of my coronation took place 1 year after I had become the Queen. It was in 1838. Lord Melbourne said that I did it beautifully, and I was very excited. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning, stayed up way past midnight, watching fireworks from the balcony, and it was all very exciting, and I wrote in my journal, "I shall always remember this day as the proudest of my life." And it really was. So I was very happy to be the Queen, but I was a little lonely too. A couple of years before, when I was 17 years old, I had met 2 of my German cousins, Albert and Ernest of Saxe and Coburg, and I met them again after I became the Queen. My uncle Leopold desired me to marry a German prince. I knew this. Albert knew it too, and he was agreeable to being groomed to be the husband of the Queen of England. Now, happily, I found Albert much to my liking the second time we met. Not so much the first. He was a bit of a disappointment the first time round. But no, the second time, he had grown into a man. He was so beautiful and handsome. I know, we'll bring a portrait around, and I know, ladies, that you will understand immediately what I mean when I say that I was most anxious to land this man. Lady Cameron, would you like to take it around? The royal protocol demanded that I propose marriage to him. So I went to him, and I told him it would make me only too happy if he would do as I wished. And he said yes. We were married in February of 1840, and then we went on a very short honeymoon for a couple of days. And I wrote in my journal, "My dearest Albert helped me put on my stockings. I went in and saw him shave. A great delight for me." And that is all I will say about that. Now, I have to tell you that Albert, we were very happy together, but I think that Albert thought that as soon as we were married, I would turn over to him all the red boxes. You know, the red boxes full of state papers. And I didn't want to do this. I had just come from being under the thumb of a man. I didn't want to do it again. So we had quite a few rows about this. Now, that was unfortunate, but the good thing about having a row with your partner is that then you get to make up. But the unfortunate consequences of this is that sometimes you find yourself with child. And that is exactly what happened to me. So, I didn't get to have Albert all to myself for very long. I was very soon with child, and in November of the same year that we were married, I gave birth to our first child, and it was a daughter. And we named her Victoria, like me, but we always called her Vicky. She was the Princess Royal because she was the first child of the monarch. I thought that she was the most brilliant and amazing child, and I didn't think that any other subsequent children would be able to live up to her. And in fact, I don't think they ever did. But she was put into the care of Baroness Lazen. Sadly, Albert and Lazen did not agree on how to run the household, nor how to run the nursery. And so I was obliged to part with her. And I was very sad. But with Conroy's banishment from court, and now Lazen going, I was able to reconcile a bit with Mama. And this was what Albert wished, because my mother was his favorite aunt. Yes, we were cousins. So after Vicky, just a year later, I gave birth to another child, and this was a boy, and we named him Albert Edward, but he was always called Bertie in the family. Now, Bertie would grow up, marry the Princess of Denmark, Alexandra, we always called her Alex, and he would succeed me to the throne upon my death and would reign as Edward VII. They had many children, and of course, it would be normal that he would follow me onto the throne. Now, after Vicky and Bertie, I had 7 more children, 9 in all of whom reached adulthood, married, and had children of their own. Oh, all but Louise. Louise. Louise was my artistic one, my rebellious child, the one who was a sculptress and a lover of unconventional ways. She was also the only one of my children to marry a commoner. This is known as a morganatic marriage, when one marries beneath one's station. She married Lorne, the future Duke of Argyll, and they had a happy, I think, marriage. They were my representatives in Canada for a while. They had no children, but Louise threw herself into good works, creating the Ladies' Work Society and many other charitable endeavors. Now, in addition to Louise and Vicky, who eventually married the Prince of Prussia, the Emperor-to-be, and she became eventually the Empress of Prussia and the mother of the future Kaiser Wilhelm, I had 3 other daughters, Helena, Alice, and Beatrice. Now, Alice, she married into the Hesse family. Have you heard of the Hessians? Yes. Well, she married into the Hesse family and had many children of her own. Probably the one that you would know best would be her daughter, Alexandra, Aliki. My granddaughter, Aliki, and her sister, Elizabeth, Ella, married into the Russian royal family, and they were murdered by the Bolsheviks at the outbreak of the Russian Revolution. I am so thankful that neither I nor their mother Alice lived to see that terrible event. Now, Alice was an excellent caregiver. She had met Florence Nightingale. Do you know her? She had come to talk to Albert and I about possible hospital reform, and Alice thought she was wonderful. Unfortunately, being a good caregiver was Alice's downfall. You see, her family came down with the diphtheria, and she decided to nurse her family herself. Her little son, who was very ill, wanted to know what had happened to his little sister. Do you know what happened to the littlest sister? baby May died of the diphtheria. And when her brother asked about her, Alice was so heartbroken that she broke her own rule about no physical contact with the sick, and she kissed him. The kiss of death, as Benjamin Disraeli would later call it. And so Alice was the first of my children to die. It is such a terrible thing, so tragic. It is not natural to lose a child. Both Alice and Vicky lost favorite sons even before I did. Vicky's little Siggy died of a fever when he was 3 years old, and Alice's poor Fritty fell from a window, and it killed him because he was a hemophiliac. But we can talk about that later. My third daughter, Helena, we always called her Lenchen, she married Prince Christian, and she lost many children too. They had a very long and happy marriage, but only 4 of their children survived infancy. Now, my last daughter, Beatrice, baby, I had no intention of her marrying. I wanted her to stay with me and be my private secretary. So I did everything I could to prevent her from meeting eligible young men. But you know how these young girls will be. She met a prince by the name of Henry. He was called Lico in the family. He was one of the Battenberg princes. You might know the name as Mountbatten. Yes, yes. Now, I said no. So for 6 months, Beatrice and I didn't speak to one another, except for the notes that we passed across the breakfast table. But finally, I relented, after extracting a promise from Lico that he would never take her away from me, and that they would always live in one of my royal residences, which they did. Tragically, Lico went off on an expedition to Africa, and he died of a fever there. And they had to send him back to us, packed in a barrel of rum, for proper burial. Isn't that tragic? No one wants to be packed in a barrel of rum. Now, also tragically was that one of Beatrice's daughters married into the Spanish royal family and brought hemophilia into that royal family. And then, most infamously, my granddaughter Aliki, who married into the Russian royal family, brought hemophilia into that branch, leading her into mysticism and into trusting that horrible Rasputin with the terrible consequences that we know. Hemophilia had not been known in my family before my time. So some ugly rumors began that perhaps I was an illegitimate child. Well, you have only to compare a portrait of me with one of my father to know that I am most definitely of the House of Hanover. It's not really a compliment. But we do have some family photographic albums that Lady Cameron will pass out. And as the saying goes, if you've seen one, you've seen them all, because they're all the same. So, sadly, hemophilia has been known to mutate. And that is what happened to me. I passed this dreadful disease on to only one of my 4 sons. But my daughters would bring hemophilia into their families that they married into. The one son that I gave it to was Leopold. But even he managed to live to adulthood. He married and had children of his own before he passed away at the age of 32 because he'd banged his leg and it killed him. Because of the hemophilia. In fact, his daughter Alice was my longest lived grandchild. She died in 1981, almost 80 years to the day of my own death in 1901. And so my daughters and granddaughters passed this disease on to their sons with disastrous results for the royal families of Europe. I am so thankful that I did not live to see the decimation of my family after the Great War. Now, in addition to my 5 daughters, I also had 4 sons. Bertie, the Prince of Wales, whom I've already mentioned, Affy, our Navy man, Arthur, the handsomest of the boys, my favorite, And then, of course, Leopold, the one with the hemophilia. He was the ugliest, sickliest baby. But he was the most intellectual of my sons. Not on a par with Vicky, of course, but it was on him that I relied to help me with state papers after the death of his father, much to the distress of Bertie. I simply could not trust Bertie with state papers. Albert and I really believed that he would be a terrible king. Turned out we were wrong, but at the time, we just found him absolutely incorrigible. And I will tell you, for many years, I blamed Bertie for the death of his father. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but let me explain. Bertie was always getting himself into one scandalous situation after another. And this particular time, Albert didn't mention anything about it to me. Now, Albert at that time, in his early 40s, was already sickly, and the weather was dreadful. But he went down to Cambridge because he had gotten news that Bertie was involved with an actress this time. And he went down to talk some sense into our wayward son. And he came home, my husband came home so ill that he took to his bed in the Blue Room, never to rise from it again. We were almost all of us around his bedside when he breathed his last. Albert died on the 14th of December, 1861, a date that will be forever dreadful to me. Bertie, almost 10 years later, almost died on the anniversary of his father's death. And my daughter Alice, she did die on the anniversary of her father's death in 1878. The last words to pass her lips were, "Dear Papa." I like to think that she saw him, that he was waiting for her. As for me, I will tell you that it took me at least 10 years to come out of the worst of my mourning. And I wore my widow's weeds for the rest of my life. Such was my love and appreciation for Albert. He was such a good and devoted man, completely devoted to my people and to their success. Did you know that it was Albert who envisioned and brought to fruition the great exhibition of 1851? Did any of you attend? Well, you missed it. It was a magnificent experience, a showcase of England's power and innovation. Albert was so interested in all of these things, and he loved to share them with the children. And I have some things that I'd like to share with you about Albert. He loved the children so much. And now, I love my children too, but I prefer to deal with children one at a time. Otherwise, they're simply too rambunctious and too noisy and a little disgusting, I don't know. But in any case, Albert loved to have all the children around us, especially at the holidays. And he brought many of our German customs to England. Now, how many of you put up a Christmas tree around the holidays? So before I married Albert, do you know that in England, nobody put up evergreens or Christmas trees? The Puritans had banned them back in the 1600s. And so it wasn't really very popular. But Albert popularized this. Before that, people thought it was a pagan practice. So you can thank Albert for your Christmas trees. Now, Albert was very interested in education, not only for the boys, but also for the girls, especially for Vicky, because he thought that she would play a very important role on the world stage, and he wanted to make sure that she understood everything completely. But this does not mean that Albert and I were in favor of women's rights. We were not. And I would like to share with you some lines, because I am every day more convinced that we women, if we are to be good women, feminine and amiable and domestic, are not fitted to reign. And as I've publicly stated, and I have the statement right here, this is a proclamation. The Queen is most anxious to enlist everyone in checking this mad, wicked folly of women's rights. It is a subject which makes the Queen so furious that she cannot contain herself. Now, I was so fortunate to have Albert by my side. I know that I told you that when we married, I didn't want to give him access to the red boxes. But after many years, and so many, children, one after the other, and being confined to childbed over and over again, I was most relieved to be able to give up some of this responsibility to Albert. And he was king in all but name. Now, my people had not seen fit, my government had not seen fit to give him the title of king consort. They only made him consort in 1857, after many years of marriage. And I think that it was because he was German. And I think there was some prejudice there and some discrimination against my husband. And we were always accused of speaking German. So I wrote a letter to my Privy Council, and I'll read a line or so of it. I said, "The Prince and Queen speak English quite as much as German, and I resent the continual and unbounded dislike of foreigners and everything foreign, which breaks out continually and is very painful to the Queen, whose husband, mother, and all her dearest relations and friends are foreigners. We take these aspersions greatly to heart." Had I had my way, Albert would have been king consort, no less. And I wrote to my children a letter in which I explained to them how fortunate and lucky they were to have Albert as their father. In this letter I wrote, "None of you can ever be proud enough of being the child of such a father who has not his equal in this world, so great, so good, so faultless. Try all of you to follow in his footsteps, and don't be discouraged, for to be really in everything like him, none of you, I am sure, will ever be. Try, therefore, to be like him in some points, and you will have acquired a great deal." So, what more can I tell you? What myths can I dispel? Oh, I know. I didn't always go around saying, "We are not amused." I think I said it once to a nephew who had made an inappropriate joke at the table. Now, I have a sense of humor, and I like to laugh, and I laugh often. In fact, my detractors say that I have a childish sense of humor. Well, be that as it may, I do laugh, I do smile, but I will not smile for photographs or portraits because I don't like the way my teeth look. That's true. I think there's only one photograph existing of me smiling, and I don't like it at all. And I love dancing. Oh, I love to dance. I danced well into my 70s, much past the time when Albert ever wanted to dance. He didn't really like to dance. I especially like to dance with my Scottish Highlander servants because I really liked the jigs and the reels. Have any of you ever done a jig or a reel? It's so exciting and energetic, don't you think? Now, this brings me to a discussion of my Scottish Highlander servant, my gillie, Mr. John Brown. Oh, I know what my subjects have said on the matter. They called me Mrs. Brown in a most disrespectful way. But you know, they all call me their fat little queen. I'm not fat. I'm only 125 pounds. I suppose at 5 feet tall, maybe that is a little fat, I don't know. But what can you expect? Now, I'll tell you the truth about John Brown. I did love John. John was my best friend, and I had never had a best friend before. After Albert died, it was difficult, and I wanted to have someone in my life who thought of me as a woman and not simply their queen. So I suppose I gave him too much freedom, too much, I don't know. I know my children were very unhappy about it. He wasn't intimidated by me. He called me woman. I said, "Get on your horse, woman." So, no, I will admit, when he died in 1883, it was almost as bad as when Albert had died. And I did ask to be buried with a photograph of him and a lock of his hair. So I'll allow you to draw your own conclusions. But I also made friends with one of my Hindustani servants, Abdul Karim. He was called the Munshi. And it was a platonic relationship, but I loved him for bringing India to me when I was unable to go there. He even taught me some words of Hindustani. I wasn't very good at it. But I have no prejudice towards any of my subjects of any race. In fact, in the 1850s, I took on, raised, and loved like my own, an African princess by the name of Sarah Forbes Bonetta. She had come under the protection of one of my captains, one of my ship captains. He saved her. Her family had been massacred by a rival tribe, and she was going to be ritually sacrificed. When he saved her and brought her back to England, where I took her under my wing, provided for her education and all of that. And when she was old enough, I arranged for her to be married to an African businessman by the name of James Davies. And they had a little girl, and they named her Victoria. And I was that little girl's godmother. I was godmother to a great many children, and I was grandmother to 42 grandchildren. Can any of you beat my record? I earned my nickname as grandmother to Europe through the marriages of my children and my grandchildren into all of the royal families of Europe and beyond. In 1876, I became the Empress of India, and I was eternally grateful to Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli for helping that happen. I now reigned over an empire upon which the sun never set. Oh, we had our trials and tribulations in government. There was the potato famine in Ireland. There was the Crimean War, the Boer War, the Franco-Prussian War. We suffered the growing pains of industrialization and social change. I survived 7 or 8 assassination attempts. I know that my time has been extraordinary. In my lifetime, England went from an agrarian society to a modern empire with all the trappings of modernity. Just think, in my lifetime, steam, railroads, electricity, gas, telegraph, telephones, photography, cinematography, and those new motor cars, just to name a few. In 1887, I celebrated my 50th year on the throne, my golden jubilee. And in 1897, my diamond jubilee, 60 years on the throne. I was at that time the longest reigning monarch that had ever lived in England. And I would remain so for many, many years until I was succeeded by my great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II. She managed 70 years on the throne in a platinum jubilee. She was married to Prince Philip, who was my great-great-grandson. I am very thankful for the time that I had, for my life, for the length of my reign, which was almost 64 years. I suffered a bit at the end from cerebral hemorrhage and stroke, starvation, not being able to eat and whatnot. But it was nothing compared to the cancer that took Affie in 1900 and the terrible cancer that Vicky endured that last year of her life and mine. We were not able to be together at the end because of it, and she survived me by only a few months. I was not unhappy to pass mostly peacefully into the arms of my Maker, there to be reunited with my dearest Albert, my dear Mama, my children, Alice, Affie, and of course Leopold, and all the other friends and family members who had predeceased me. Our time had changed. Our world had passed away, and the modern world had replaced it. I no longer belonged here. My place was in the 19th century, and I was content to remain there. And so I want to thank you for coming here tonight to hear a little bit about my life and the life of a queen. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions?
A little I have read about her. She loved her men.
About me? Well, yeah,
Big men.
You know, physical intimacy is one of the greatest gifts that we have received from God. And if we don't enjoy the gifts from God, are we honoring Him? So you're right. Any other questions? Yes?
What is on your sash?
Oh, so this is the sash of state, and we have the Order of the Garter here. There are different orders that you can be chosen to have, and these are given out as royal rewards. This is a portrait of my mother. This is another order. This is a portrait of Albert, the Order of Albert. And yes, so this is generally worn for state appearances. I'm making an exception for tonight. I thought you'd like it. Any other questions? Have any of you ever been to Buckingham Palace or to Balmoral or Windsor Castle? I'm buried at Frogmore at Windsor. Yes?
Wasn't she quite a horsewoman, a horseback rider?
I did ride, but not as much as my great-great-granddaughter Elizabeth, who was quite the horsewoman. I got a little fat as I got older, and after the 1870s or so, I didn't really ride so much anymore. It was more carriage for me at that point, but I did love horses. I didn't like exercise, though, and I didn't like fires in the house. I liked to have all the rooms cold. You know, when you're having your own personal summer, you want it to be nice and chilly. Don't care what anybody else thinks. Any other questions? Yes?
When you moved into Buckingham Palace, was it just built at that time?
No, it had been a home. It was a smaller estate. It was in rather poor repair, actually, when we moved in. And we had to do quite a bit of renovating and updating. But we thought that because of where it was located, we thought that it would make a good royal residence. So apparently it still is a good royal residence. Yes?
Hi, all those babies, did you have midwives or the equivalent of a midwife?
Doctors, yes, and midwives, my ladies in waiting. And for the last two, for Leopold and for Beatrice, I was able to use chloroform. The doctors didn't want me to because they were afraid if something happened, they would be blamed. But I have to tell you, it was the most amazing thing. I went to sleep, I woke up, and there's a baby. But I didn't nurse my children. I have to say, I was always rather disgusted when some of my daughters told me that they were going to nurse their children. I always found that to be rather bovine. So I didn't nurse them. You know, little babies, they can be rather disgusting, you know. So it's always good to have the midwives and the nurses and the governesses on hand. Yes?
How many generations between you and King Charles?
Well, let's see, Elizabeth was my great-great-granddaughter, so he's my great-great-great-grandson. Charles.
Yes.
Yes. 3 greats. Yes.
What I read, you really love the men.
She's going to insist on this. I'm not telling you any more than I already have. Quite unseemly for a queen to be talking about the bedchamber. No, never. No, we were always faithful to one another. You know, you bring up a good point, because Albert and I both came from unhappy family situations. His father he was terrible. He slept with everyone. And so when Albert I think he was 5 years old when his mother left. And at that time, if the wife left, she had no control over her children. So he never saw his mother again. And then she died, of course. So when Albert and I married, we had this tacit agreement that we were going to take the court and we were going to turn it into something wonderful. We wanted family values. We wanted everyone to know that we were a happy couple and that we had a beautiful family. And we really tried to make that happen, because the court before that was seen as, I don't know, what should I say, sinful and so profligate. And we wanted to change that reputation. And I think we did. I think we were quite successful at that. So, hand it to us. Yes.
Yeah, didn't Albert's brother die after contracting venereal disease?
That is the rumor. That is the rumor, yes. Yes. Yes.
Could you mention something about these attempted assassinations?
Yes, well, you know, I had been to Ireland and I loved it. But after that, the Irish didn't love me so much. It was really my government that they didn't like, because I personally donated £5,000 sterling to help the Irish during the potato famine, but my government was refusing to help. And it was a terrible situation. So usually they were either crazy or Irish. Is that the same thing? I'm joking. So yes, there were multiple assassination attempts with pistols. That was usually the most common, were pistols. And Albert was with me one time. We were in a carriage. And yes, quite terrifying, actually, to be shot at. But you know, it is worth being shot at, because then you see the outpouring of love that you receive. Yes. So I didn't mind so much. Any other questions?
You didn't get hurt.
No, I didn't. I never. So, you know, thanks be to God. He preserved me for many years.
How old were you when you passed?
81.
Oh, that's young.
Yes, yes. 81.
And Albert was how old?
He was 41, going to be 42. Yes, very young, very young. Yes, too young, too young.
You never wanted to remarry though?
No,
It's frowned on.
no, I really couldn't. I mean, I suppose I could have, but, you know, after being under the control of Conroy, and then really under Albert's control after that, I didn't really see it that way at the time. But then I think later I began to think, you know, it's not bad being on my own, being able to do what I want. And so no, I kept my mourning for Albert. I did enjoy John Conroy's company. I enjoyed Abdul Karim's company. But no, I remained steadfast in my grieving for Albert all those years. Did you have a question? No? Anyone else? Well, thank you, yes.
To have suitors that would try to get you to date them or have a relationship with them after Albert died? You didn't want to do anything, but the other men want to go and chase you?
No, I don't remember any suitors in particular. I think I was probably not very attractive that time. I don't know. No suitors. No. Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I very much appreciate your attendance this evening. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.